VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Welcome to Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network. My name is Jim Schneider. We're glad that you've joined us today as we take another look at current events, especially in light of our recent election. We've been taking various Crosstalk programs and taking a look at issues in light of the election, whether it be that of the health care, whether it be that of the LGBT agenda, which we discussed with Peter LaBarbera. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the matter of gun control, certainly being in the crosshairs of the newly elected administration. One of the things that, or several of the things that are advancing forth as a result of the election. And I could think of nobody better but to welcome back Larry Pratt here, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America, to discuss the issues. Larry, thanks for joining us today.
Well, Jim, thank you. Good to be with you.
You know, as we talk about the fallout of this past election, it was within just a day of this election, I started getting all these news stories that was telling us that just hours after Barack Obama was reelected that the United States all of a sudden announces, hey, we're backing this United Nations committee's call to renew debate on a gun control treaty. What's going on?
Yeah, it was remarkable. It was really not a whole day before it was the next business day, let's put it that way, when they said, okay, that treaty negotiation that we shelved, well, the negotiations are back on, and that means they're going to be talking to the UN about some kind. Well, we've seen a draft of the treaty. We know that it would entail registration of guns through licensure. It would entail the so-called smart technology, which would drive most ammunition manufacturers out of business because they would have to, by hand, put unique identifying marks on ammunition, both the bullet and the casing. It's a useless technology. Even the state of California concluded that and didn't pursue it in the end, but that would be something that this UN treaty would be calling for. It's clearly something aimed at driving the civilian market away from firearms ownership because it would just be cost prohibitive. That's what they would like to get done. Frankly, I don't think that they have any chance of that even in Harry Reid's Senate. But what I do see them doing is a suspicion born of what we've already seen the president do, making executive orders in the face of the law, in the face of the Constitution. What does he care? Whether it be a limited form of implementing the DREAM Act without bothering with Congress's approval or any number of other things. I would not be surprised, I would be alarmed, but not surprised, if the president said to gun stores, if you want to keep your federal license, which is unconstitutional, but nevertheless, if you want to keep your federal license to be in business, then stop selling handguns that have a more powerful round than a .380, and stop selling long arms that can accept high-capacity magazines. That would, in one stroke of the pen, impose the Clinton gun ban in steroids on gun owners. Because, no gun dealer in the country could afford not to do something like that.
Well, increasingly, Larry, and I think you aptly pointed out here, the concern, the alarm over such an executive order or presidential directive coming forth is because, since last year's State of the Union, that's been the mantra. If Congress doesn't act, I will.
Yes. That was a declaration of war on the Constitution. Actually, there had been prior warnings because the president has been, for a long time, if one looked into his record, aware that he doesn't accept the Constitution. He doesn't, even though he swore an oath to uphold it, what he really did was to swear an oath to carry out what he views as a mandate to do anything he wants because, as he told the Republicans in a very rare meeting with them, I won.
Yeah.
That means he can do anything he wants in his mind.
Well, at the same time,
he's off on, and going.
Doesn't the U.S. House, couldn't they have that same claim? We won?
Not only that, but they should exercise it as steadfastly as is the president, and they can checkmate the president. This is something that we're going to be doing a lot of urging and asking our members at Gun Owners of America to contact through email, through phone calls, through town hall meetings, their members of Congress, and tell them, particularly if they're a Republican, but even some Democrats might want to know that this is going to be an issue that might reduce their numbers further in the next election. They want the president's unconstitutional and illegal actions, and in particular in the area of pursuing a gun treaty at the UN, that want that defunded. There's a big one that doesn't get much attention as a gun measure, but it is, and that's Obamacare. Obamacare, among its many unconstitutional aspects, Supreme Court, has made privacy something that only applies between consenting adults, but not certainly our relationship with the government. It says that all of our medical records are available to be pawed through by bureaucrats somewhere in Washington looking for a reason to disenfranchise gun owners, to say, oh, you have a medical diagnosis that means you might be a danger to yourself or others, so we're going to come and knock on the door for the B.A.T.F. and take away your guns. That's precisely what already happened to a veteran, because their names had, even prior to Obamacare, been routinely, they were in the process of being computerized and sent over to the Veterans Administration. We fought this battle unsuccessfully, I'm afraid, because the NRA was on the other side back in 2008, and President Bush signed a measure which enabled the government to continue doing that with records that it already had. And all that Obamacare really did was to say, forget privacy. If it's a medical record, we're going to have at it. And even though we haven't proved in court that you might be a danger to self or others, even though there's no due process, something that's been part of the English and American tradition for a millennium and more, no, we're just going to move ahead, because, as you said, the president is of the opinion that since he won, he can do any bloody thing he wants.
Well, Larry, is there a connection then? Because increasingly, as people are going to get a checkup at their doctor, they're being asked questions such as, do you have firearms in your home?
And the pediatricians are among the worst in that regard. Their association recommends to their members that they do ask, are there guns in the house?
What happens to this information? Where does it go?
Well, now that medical records are all being computerized, it eventually is going to end up in government computer bases, or actually what they'll be. What technically I believe is being done is that they will be interconnected, so that the doctor's medical records have to be available, accessible to some drone somewhere in the Washington, D.C. area who's out on the lookout for how they can disenfranchise gun owners. We had a member that called us during the original fight when it only involved veterans, and this was back in 2008. He had a concealed carry permit. He went to get it renewed. Well, he shouldn't have had to have a concealed carry permit, and there are 4 states that recognize that the only constitutional way to go is no permit. But this guy, it was in the South, and he went to renew his permit, and he was denied. And it was because of one of these medical diagnoses, even though he'd been long since a veteran of Vietnam, raised a family, successful in business. But not only did he not get his license renewed for his concealed carry permit, within the week, the ATF was knocking on his door to collect his guns that they knew about, because when you buy a gun at a dealer, it goes on his books, and he has to keep a record of that for at least 20 years. Or if he goes out of business sooner, it gets sent to Washington, D.C., where it's computerized, of course. and in violation of law, but they do it. And that's how they knew that the guy had guns, because they had access to these gun dealer records, and as soon as his name popped up, the databases, I should say, search was done, and they came for him.
Wow. Larry, in relationship here on this UN treaty, we understand that talks are taking place coming up in the month of March?
They will be resumed in the month of March, something that Hillary Clinton had promised, actually, even before she had been sworn in as Secretary of State, that this would be one of the regime's paramount objectives. And I don't see, as I said earlier, I don't see the treaty being ratified by a Senate. Mm-hmm. Last year there were 50 senators, I think it's 51 now, that said that they would not vote to ratify. Well, you must have 67 to ratify, and if you can only afford to lose, therefore, 33, and if 50 have said they're not going to play ball, then it's DOA. But I can just hear it now. As we've seen in other areas, mm-hmm. The federal government will say, well, all the countries in the world have signed on, and in order for us to be good world citizens, we have to impose these rules of international law on the United States for us to be a good citizen. And I can give you an example of how something like that was done in another venue or another area. A gold mine, ironically called the New Age Mine, was being prepared to actually resume production. Price of gold had gone up. It was going to be profitable once again to mine gold. They went through all the hoops, which was $3 million worth of tests and inspections. And so they're on the verge of opening up. They're outside Yellowstone Park in Wyoming, and an alarmed Clinton bureaucracy contacted the UN, and the UN cooperated and responded by unilaterally declaring the area around the mine, which was much wider than U.S. law protects Yellowstone Park. They had a swath now that was wide enough to take in the New Age mine, and that shut them down. They were not able to operate because now they were in a World Heritage Site. Mm-hmm. No vote of Congress, yeah. But whoomp, yep. You're out of business.
Agenda 21 right before our eyes.
Agenda 21 in all its glory, absolutely. That's one example, but if they'll do it in an area of property rights, well, to a considerable extent, owning a firearm is a property right as well as a right of defending ourselves against tyranny, which is what the Second Amendment's really all about. And for them to so easily accomplish something like that, my guess is it's only a political calculation in their mind. Can they get away with it or not? They don't worry about legitimate government. They just worry about, can I get away with it politically?
Larry Pratt is with us today, Executive Director of Gun Owners of America. We'll be back in just 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, who discovered dinosaurs first?
Chris, in the late 1600s, some giant bones were found that nobody could identify. They thought it might be a giant elephant. In the early 1800s, an amateur paleontologist found some bones which eventually became identified as belonging to a giant lizard. Fossil experts gave it the name dinosaur, which means terrible lizard. Most of them, of course, were vegetarian, but some of them appear to have been definitely meat eaters, and terrible indeed. Of course, I think they were discovered long ago, back before the flood. They were created on day 6 along with humans, and then most of them died in Noah's flood. That's the flood back in Genesis.
Thanks, Dr. Morris. For more on the relevance of creation, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org. For the Institute for Creation Research, I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for joining us.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Larry Pratt is with us today, and one of the issues that many are concerned about is how quickly we saw after Obama's win, less than 24 hours after the win, then we see, of course, this vote coming forth from the UN to start a new round of talks here on the Arms Trade Treaty. Congressman Tim Huelscamp of Kansas said, although the resolution was expected, it's still appalling that the Obama administration is willing to put the UN's agenda ahead of America's constitutionally guaranteed rights. It's obvious that President Obama knows his anti-firearms agenda is politically unpopular. It is why he neglected it during his campaign, but now with the election well behind him, his administration is full throttle towards stifling American Second Amendment rights. If and when such a treaty comes to the Senate for ratification, America's legislators must stand for America's rights ahead of any international body's political agenda. Well, hats off to Congressman Huelscamp here, Larry.
You know, what we're looking at is a profound dislike of self-defense, and this is something that's characteristic of the left. They don't believe in self-defense either personally or as a matter of national self-defense. They think that self-defense and the knowledge that a potential victim is capable of self-defense is provocative and actually will make things worse, that somehow the potential victim will make things worse by responding to protect himself using, indeed, lethal force. We see the same mentality in Benghazi, where they had actually withdrawn many of the assets they had to protect that diplomatic building there in Benghazi weeks before the attack. What they can't get through their head is they had sent an engraved invitation to people who think of nothing but murdering people who are not like them. Hey, come and get us. We now have made it so that your job is very likely to succeed. When they had a gun ban in Washington, D.C., till the Supreme Court sort of took it away, their crime rate had been among the highest in the world, actually, their violent murder rate. And when they took away the total gun ban, still extremely difficult to get a gun in the District of Columbia, as a Washington Times reporter made clear. Emily Miller went through I don't know how many columns showing the months and the money it took her to finally get permission to get a specific gun that she couldn't even get in the District of Columbia because there's still no gun stores able to operate in the District of Columbia. Well, that same mindset was operating in Benghazi, and it got the same results. You get more violent crime, this time from Muslim terrorists, as you do in a city like Washington, D.C., or Detroit, Chicago, New York, wherever they either have a ban or make it extremely difficult to get a gun for your own protection, let alone challenging tyranny. Well, don't be surprised. Criminals kind of get it figured out where it's going to be safe to attack. They didn't attack in some other place where they might have been repulsed in Libya, but they attacked that diplomatic building where we had all but put up a neon sign saying, jihadi attacks welcome.
Wow. Hey, Larry, let me just pretend here for a moment. Suppose this arms trade treaty stated something like this: private acquisition, ownership, or possession of firearms must remain a matter of domestic law. If that were included in the treaty, would you still be opposed?
Yeah, because it still gives jurisdiction to the United Nations that we would be committing ourselves to registration and licensing, and some relatively vague formulation like that doesn't preclude all of the enormous restrictions that they can impose that make most people think it's not worth it.
Do you have any concern about any gun control matters coming up during the lame duck session?
I think we have the votes in the Republican House to stop it. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think we probably have them in the Senate. My biggest concern is that Speaker John Boehner he's actually a rather a marvel. At least I find it marvelous that he can walk upright, and yet he clearly has no backbone. And this guy would rather go into a fetal position than fight. And I think we're probably at more risk, although I think we're going to be okay, in a lame duck session than we will be next year when some freshmen are coming to town who have a track record of when the leadership says, well, we can't do that. That's too controversial. All that tells them is, oh, yeah? Steve Stockman was a member of the Congress back in 1995, came in with a class of 94. And Stockman, in his 2 years there at that time, before he got redistricted and wasn't able to get back in, had challenged the Clinton gun ban. The leadership at the time under Gingrich and Dick Armey thought that was too controversial. And Armey actually had a meeting in his majority leader's office with Stockman and me, and he told us to our face, you'll get a vote on this measure over my dead body. Well, happily, we did get a vote because Gingrich, who essentially agreed with Armey, didn't like the fact that it was controversial, but he saw something that Armey hadn't seen. We're not a partisan organization at Gun Owners of America. Now, admittedly, we've supported mostly Republicans, but that doesn't mean that even when we have supported somebody, if he's not doing what he said he would do, we will hold him accountable. And Gingrich knew that the postcards and the email, well, it wasn't much email back then, but the phone calls and the letters and the postcards were on their way. And that we, as he told the caucus, we need to vote on Stockman's bill as soon as possible, because if we don't, it'll simply give Gun Owners of America more time to beat up on us in our districts. And so he prevailed, they had the vote, and they were able to count on other John Boehner types of spineless people walking upright, like Bob Dole, the Senate Republican leader at the time, to smother the baby in the crib when it got over to the Senate. And we eventually got rid of the ban, but no thanks to those guys. Steve Stockman simply didn't take no for an answer, and he made things happen. Another one who I know personally also that's coming to the Congress is former state rep in Indiana, Jackie Walorski. When she was a state rep freshman, newly minted, just been elected, Mitch Daniels was already the governor of the state of Indiana, known as a fiscal conservative, but actually was pushing the Republicans, particularly in the House, because as with Congress, the House has to originate taxes, to increase taxes to balance the budget. And the Republican caucus initially was going to go along with it. Well, Walorski, after a brief assessment of what was happening, realized that if she didn't take the bull by the horns, nobody was going to touch it. And so she enlisted a couple of other fellow reps, and together, the three of them formed the tip of a spear that ultimately forced the Republican caucus to publicly oppose the tax increase of their Republican governor, and he then responded with accepting the cuts that would balance the budget. Well, these two are among several that I think, but I don't know them personally, but have reason to believe will behave in a similar fashion. This is unprecedented, to my knowledge. I've never known of a time when the House had people that had a proven record of, on key issues, taking on their own leadership, being willing to go public, to embarrass their leadership into behaving like the Republicans they said they would be. And this is very good news for pro-family people, for low-tax people, for less regulation people, and for gun owners. In other words, the whole Republican-based coalition is going to benefit because this last election resulted in people coming to Washington who simply are not going to be here for business as usual.
Larry Pratt from Gun Owners. Larry, earlier this month, it was reported that residents of Cook County, Illinois, now that includes the city of Chicago, that they had a new tax imposed upon gun purchasers that would go toward paying the medical treatment for those resulting from gun violence. A $25 tax on every firearm sold within Cook County. What's your response to that?
They would make a lot more money if they charged people convicted of violent crimes of a $25 injury fee or hospital fee or something like that, because violent criminals far outnumber gun owners in Chicago. Now, I believe it's the case that state law traps people in a particular jurisdiction. So if you try to buy a gun outside of Cook County and thus avoid those horrible restrictions that, or fees or taxes that they're trying to impose on gun owners all the time, there's no escape. And so you either have the option of buying it privately, which is not legal in Illinois, but I'm sure it's done all the time. Criminals typically don't have a firearms owner identification card, but otherwise they're trapped. And so these folks in Illinois really know how to run a corrupt, thuggish government, and it's clear they are not comfortable with an armed citizenry. And, maybe, they shouldn't be, because they are so dictatorial and tyrannical and wanting to control everything within their reach in that city. Yes, they might be concerned that they could reach the point when they have pushed too far.
Yeah. Another issue, Larry, increasing, we're just seeing a number of states that are standing up to the federal government. I understand some are standing up to last year's National Defense Authorization Act. What can you tell us about this? I know Texas and some other states are saying no.
That is something that I believe would be a prime area for states to push back. When something is clearly unconstitutional, and the thing that we find particularly unconstitutional is the Fourth Amendment sacking that occurred in the NDAA, saying that the military could make arrests and hold American citizens without a warrant indefinitely. Maybe they belong to an organization suspected of being a terrorist organization. Well, in Janet Napolitano's view, pro-life groups and groups like Gun Owners of America are suspected terrorist organizations. So that could set you up for all kinds of unconstitutional hassling, not by some law enforcement agency in your own state, but by the military, which is supposed to only point its guns abroad. And there's even a Posse Comitatus Act that was passed in the 19th century. Unhappily, it's been whittled down considerably, but nevertheless, it prohibits the military from being involved in law enforcement. If we want to be a banana republic, then the NDAA provision in these two clauses that set this problem up that we're talking about, that's fine. That will make us into a banana republic.
Larry Pratt with us here today from Gun Owners. Let's open the lines here if you'd like to speak with our guest, 800-733-9829, as we take a look as to the fallout of this election as it relates to gun control and gun rights. We'll be back in just 60 seconds. This is Crosstalk.
Nearly 90% of Christian children attend a public school. Filmmaker Colin Gunn, a homeschool father of 7, went on the field trip of a lifetime. Driving an old school bus, Colin and his family traveled across the nation, exploring the origins and social impact of public school education to discover if children are morally and physically safe, if public schools are religiously neutral, and should Christians try to be salt and light in secular schools. 102 minutes in length, it's an impactful message. In the companion book, Indoctrination, some 18 writers come together to look at how the educational system is actively at work to alter your child's moral values, worldview, and religious beliefs. It explores the biblical principles regarding education and who is ultimately responsible for our children's future. The Indoctrination DVD is available for a donation of $22. The book is available for a donation of $18, or you can obtain both for a donation of $35. To obtain yours, call 1-800-729-9829, 1-800-729-9829.
Well, gun control does seem to be in the crosshairs, and folks, there are going to be issues that come up here, whether it comes through the congressional means, or rather through Senate legislation, or through presidential orders, presidential directives, executive orders. Folks, you need to stay informed on these things, and Larry, that's one of the things you do, is you put forth alerts, you keep people informed as issues break, as they come to the forefront. How is it our listeners can stay up to date on these vital issues?
Well, the alerts are free. All folks have to do to get those is to go to gunowners.org, and right there on the front page there's a place to get on our email alert list. Typically, those alerts are going to deal almost always with what's going on Capitol Hill or some political campaign and what you can do about it. If it's a legislative matter, it'll be an email going back to Capitol Hill telling them what you want them to do, what you don't want them to do. And you can also join. It's all $20, but just go to gunowners.org and you'll get started, hopefully, by just getting on those the list for getting the subscription for the email.
Our lines are packed here, Larry, and I want to get to them, but I just want to get an update on Fast and Furious. What's going on there? Eric Holder was found to be in contempt, but it's like, oh, no big deal. I mean, that's over and done with, no consequences, nothing's going on here. What is going on with Fast and Furious? Well,
although the media, not surprisingly, didn't choose to talk about it, they chose not to talk about the issue hardly at all. Mm-hmm. Some notable exceptions, but very, very few, mostly on Fox. But the matter is now in the federal district court for the District of Columbia, where the House of Representatives, following the contempt of Congress finding and vote, filed charges acting as a prosecutor in the federal court against Mr. Holder, saying that the court should order him to produce the documents they are seeking. And what that means is that even in the civil case, if he doesn't produce the documents, he goes to jail in contempt of court. So he'll still be on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., but it will be somewhat away from his current office, and it will be in the federal lockup that they have on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. So this thing was avoided, I guess we could say, by the court before the election. They could have brought up the civil complaint before the election. They don't have that busy a docket. They just bloody well did not want to do it before the election. Well, that might be political. Well, excuse me, 400 dead Mexicans and a couple of dead U.S. agents, I think has to be dealt with besides something apart from politics. There's this thingy called justice, and it's not being done. Yeah. And it was sidestepped, and the media, which 20 years ago, even perhaps 10 years ago, certainly 20 years and more, would have been all over whatever administration saying, hey, wait a minute, you guys are blood-soaked. What gives? Tell us what's going on. Give us the documents. They're not doing that now, and that's why people don't know the body count. They don't know that this was intended to sort of change the dial on the gun control debate. So, our bad, all these guns going into Mexico causing all this carnage. We need more gun control. Yeah. We know that from what whistleblowers have put forth in the record. Can you imagine? I mean, that is so ghastly that we've got a government that was happy to have people get murdered. And the media doesn't find that a little bit unusual?
Let's go to Plymouth, Wisconsin. Jim, you're on the air with Larry Pratt.
Yes, yes, Larry, I'm all for guns and weapons. A former hunter, and I was in the service. One question I have, though, is you get, once in a while, you get questions about assault weapons, and I don't see the need for assault weapons within our society. What's your opinion of that?
think to understand the answer, and I would say we should have access to those, two things. First of all, a real assault weapon is a machine gun. It's not a semi-automatic rifle. It's a gun where you pull the trigger once and bullets keep coming out until you let your finger off the trigger. Even that gun should be in private hands. The Swiss do that to this day. All Swiss men must be in the Swiss military, must do at least 2 weeks a year of military service, and they have not only the lowest murder rate in Europe, but practically of any place in the world. So clearly there's nothing dangerous in citizens having guns. And in fact, the whole idea in Switzerland, and it is the idea behind our Second Amendment, is that those guns need to be a credible threat against government that might go beyond the limits of the Constitution and set itself up as a tyrannical government. Second Amendment is not designed to protect hunting or target shooting. I think those are protected in the Ninth Amendment among the unenumerated rights. But clearly the context of the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, that means the founders were concerned about controlling the government. And just like all the rest of the Bill of Rights was set up as limitation on government action, so guns in our hands is set up as limitation on government action.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you.
And to Teresa in Viroqua, you're on the air.
Oh, thank you. A few years ago, approximately 5, I'd gone to the local clinic, Anderson Clinic here in town, and for a yearly exam, and I was asked by the doctor if I had guns in my home, and so I asked, what has that got to do with my yearly exam? And the reply given to me was that they were concerned about children, which I thought was just a farce and excuse, but...
You're quite right, and that's the answer you would expect from somebody who's drunk the Kool-Aid, that somehow guns in the home are a great health risk, when in fact, we've discussed this just a few minutes ago, the cities, before the Supreme Court decisions that prohibited complete gun ownership in their cities, before that was thrown out by the courts, those were the homes in which it was more dangerous to live. Those were the cities in which it was more dangerous to live. Being even in Northern Virginia, which is right across the river from Washington, D.C., where Gun Owners of America has its office, here in Northern Virginia, you can get a concealed carry permit. And criminals understand that if they're going to commit a crime, even to this day, they're going to be a whole lot safer themselves if they take the metro over to D.C. to commit their crime, because it's very unlikely, certainly outside the house, that they're going to meet anybody that's armed. Now there's a little bit more risk, and their crime rate has gone down as a result in the District of Columbia. And as a result, criminals have backed off some of the crime that they used to commit against people in their homes. But it's still open season on people who are out on the street.
Larry, how do you recommend people answer that question when they're posed that by their doctor?
Doctor, I will report you to the medical society if you repeat that question. Because that is an out-of-bounds question. That's like asking whether I like chocolate ice cream or not. It is not his business to be asking that. He has no basis for that. There is no protocol in any medical society other than pediatricians where they actually do recommend that. But it is clearly a boundary violation, their term. And you should tell him that if he doesn't stop asking that, you're going to make sure he gets reported to his peers. If they get enough of those complaints, at a minimum, it'll probably get him to back off.
Thanks, Teresa, for the call. Next to Connie from Oak Creek. You're on the air, Connie.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for this important program. And Larry, my question to you is, millions of people in this country own guns, private citizens. If it comes down to the government saying, turn in your guns, or the UN with their blue helmets are going to come in and arrest you, do you think that's a possibility? I've read reports online that is what they're planning, that if people don't turn in their guns, private citizens, when they're told to, they will be ordered to shoot to kill those people.
I think they would be, if they were to do that in the present context, I think they would not only have announced that they are no longer a legitimate government, but the response might horrify them. And I certainly would be on the radio advocating that people actively disobey such an order. The UN is illegitimate. We shouldn't be in the UN, so hardly should we be doing the UN's bidding. I just don't see an American government in the foreseeable future daring to do something like that, because there are some 3 million veterans with all kinds of military training, most of whom are highly supportive of limited constitutional government. And to tell them that they're no longer trusted and they have to turn in their guns along with everybody else, I don't think I would want to go there, and I'm not sure that even the narcissist in chief would want to go there.
Okay, thank you, Larry.
Thanks, Connie. To Lauren. You're on the air, Lauren.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. My contribution is that there are, in regards to the availability of our information online, that there are doctors and other professionals in the city that feel the same way we do and still keep paper records. And usually they're not with a hospital or some other group like that. But I guess I'd encourage people to call around and ask their doctor if they do keep paper records still, because there are those that still feel the same way that we do.
Yeah.
Very good point. And sometimes it might also help, and you might actually get a lower price than what he charges the insurance company if you say, I would rather maintain my privacy. What does it cost to have this exam? I'll pay you with a check as I leave.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Lauren.
No, thank you.
Jacob in Victoria, Texas, you're on the air.
Yes, sir, Mr. Schneider. Yes, sir, Mr. Pratt. Good afternoon. I was thinking about this thing with the Fast and Furious and all that. The intention of these people was to implement strict gun control along the borders.
Correct.
Now they sent all them guns down there, and they were allowing drug trafficking here in the United States, and all them people were murdered, but they didn't really care, and they went ahead and passed some controls on the borders for the gun dealers anyway. And the same thing going on over in Benghazi. Their intention is to. You can see what our administration is doing. All these people are very communist and Muslim friendly. They're establishing the caliphate, and then Obama says he's for Israel, and in his church periodical, The Trumpeter, in 2007, they printed the Hamas manifesto, very supportive of it, and Louis Farrakhan was made the Man of the Year. And it's very obvious what these people are doing, but I guess to try to keep it brief because, Media Matters, George Soros and Cass Sunstein and then people, they run the Media Matters, and they're working with the Department of Justice. And I just want to know, where's the Bernstein, the Woodward? Unless you talk about this to regular people, and you're a birther or something along them lines, you're insane. And unless the people get informed and rise up to voice their concern about this, publicly, and people are scared. There's nothing's going to happen. They keep getting away with it.
Larry, let's get your comment.
The concern that people have, and I think the caller's right, there are people who are scared, is the one area has resulted in economic boom in one area of our economy. All the millions and billions didn't do any good except go to corrupt companies, but the gun industry is flourishing. People are realizing, I better get a gun while I can.
Larry Pratt is our guest. We'll come back here to more of your calls here at Crosstalk at 800-733-9829. Their website, gunowners.org. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. Are you experiencing worry, anxiety? The Bible speaks to these issues. In fact, the Bible tells us we're to be anxious for nothing, but in prayer and supplication make our requests known to the Lord. The Scriptures are very clear that God cares for us as believers and that He watches over us and that His thoughts are continually on us. We need to be trusting the Lord in these days and understanding His provision for our lives. We also need to understand that God gives peace to those that obey Him. We see this in the Scriptures. We also see that God gives peace to those who please Him, who walk obediently according to His Word. And we see that God gives peace to those who learn from his correction. If you desire peace today, obey him, please him, and learn from his correction. And also find yourself studying God's word that will bring peace that surpasses all understanding. No need for us as Christians to have anxiety. For the Worldview Week in Minute, I'm Brandon House.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Larry Pratt is with us from Gun Owners of America. He's the executive director of their site, gunowners.org. You can sign up to stay informed on vital issues as they come up. And certainly concern is what is going to take place not only with this UN treaty, but what is being planned by means of a presidential directive. Presidential executive order, constitutional or not. And folks, we're taking your calls on a number of issues here today as it relates to gun control and it being in the crosshairs right now, and Second Amendment related issues. Let's go next to Robert in Milwaukee. You're on the air, Robert.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. You had indicated that if the doctor asks you about guns in your home, you're to tell them that they'll be reported, or you're going to report them if they ask you again. How does that work or translate for a pediatrician when they're asking at your child's normal exam?
My understanding is that we're talking about two different bodies. He belongs to I believe it's called the American Pediatric Association, but he to practice belongs to some local medical group, maybe the AMA or some other group, and that's where he could be brought up on charges if there were enough complaints that it seemed like it wasn't just one cranky person, but a pattern here. That's where he could be vulnerable.
Right, but as law-abiding citizens, how would we answer the question? Would we answer it the same way?
I would tell him that that's a boundary violation. He shouldn't be asking questions like that.
I'm sorry, what?
Tell him that that is a boundary violation and that he should not be asking questions like that. Has nothing to do with medicine. And if he wants to argue, then I'd say go ahead and report him.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert. Let's go next to Mike in Bayview. You're on the air.
Yes. Hi, Larry. I was just wondering, I tried to leave a message for gun owners like November 1st, just before voting. They have this website, FEMA Corps' first graduating class, and somebody found it on itmakessenseblog.com, and it was like 231 kids, and they've got 2,500 armored fighting vehicles ready to go, and I'm just wondering if you had spotted any of that information yet.
Now, that's very interesting that FEMA would have armored personnel carriers, is what it sounds like you're describing.
Exactly.
Is that helpful in fighting the aftermath of a hurricane? That's really amazing. It shows the total disconnect of the federal government from the Constitution. They don't have law enforcement jurisdiction outside of postal fraud and coinage fraud and piracy. That's it. There are no other legitimate constitutional areas of federal criminal law. And our acceptance of this huge body of federal criminal law shows how far we've all drifted from a proper understanding of the Constitution. And the one of the most effective answers has been coming from sheriffs who understand that the Constitution severely limits what the feds can do. Most of the limitations, most of the assigned duties are spelled out in Article 1, Section 8, some 17, 18 of them. There's probably a couple other things elsewhere in the Constitution, and that's it. That's all the federal government has been told to do. They're delegated, expressly delegated, and the idea that they can derive powers and responsibilities from the ones that have been given them is just nonsense or worse, and that needs to be challenged. And sheriffs have the ability and the authority to do just that, because a sheriff in most states of the country is the only elected cop in the whole state, and he's also the highest law enforcement authority in that county, deriving from the fact that he's really the only cop in the country that is elected by the people directly. So he is, more than any other police officer, he's the guy that speaks and represents and protects the people. And in many counties around the country now, whether it's the BLM or the Forest Service or the EPA, the feds are finding out that the sheriffs can and will, in those counties, tell them, stand down or you're under arrest.
Mike, thanks for calling. Quickly to Ed in Madison. You're on the air.
I read this quite a while back. I'm not sure I got it quite right, but this is supposed to be a famous quote that when all the guns are registered, the country will be safe.
That's attributed to Hitler or Goering or somebody like that.
Yeah. So
I'm not sure if it's historicity, but in practice, that's exactly what happened. When the Nazis took over, it wasn't long after that they used an opportunity, never let a good crisis go to waste, so to speak, to demand the collection of guns that had previously been registered by the previous government, by law of the previous Democrat socialist government. So it made their job easy. It's what happened with Castro when he took over in 1959, January 1st. First thing he did, literally the next day, he had squads out collecting guns that had been registered under the Batista government.
Thank you, Ed, for your call. And finally here to Mark. You're on the air, Mark.
Yes, my question is on Fast and Furious. Is there going to be a huge civil liability in the U.S. taxpayers, or are they on the hook because of the? I foresee lawyers suing the federal government on behalf of the Mexican victims for huge money.
There hasn't been much litigation activity coming out of Mexico. Most of the deceased probably can't afford an attorney or their representatives or their family, whatever. And the Mexican government gets a huge amount of foreign aid from the United States. So with the exception of one of their state attorneys general, there really hasn't been much but chirping of crickets coming out of Mexico. Newspapers have been covering it fairly actively, but the government has, in my opinion, clearly decided to be a nice doggy and get patted by the nice master.
Thank you, Mark. We're out of time here today. Larry Pratt is our guest from Gun Owners of America, the executive director there. Larry, for those who would like to get more info, give us again that website.
Go to gunowners.org. We'd love to have folks stop by and sign up for those free alerts.
Great. Well, Larry, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Larry Pratt from Gun Owners of America. And folks, as we continue to encourage you to be praying for our country, be praying for our leaders, and continue to be salt and light. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.